name's Jason Kovalski, and I live in southeastern Ohio. And I want to show you some of my collection or my hobby that's probably gotten a little out of hand. I'm actually a full-time school teacher. I teach middle school science, and I have a restoration shop. I do some work on the side. And to start with the cars, this is a 1966 Chevrolet Nova Super Sport. There's a little story behind this car. This car was actually built in the mid-1970s. And when I was about 6 years old, I had spotted this car at a local car show, which would have been around 1979, 1980. And I took a picture of this car with a plastic Mickey Mouse camera. And I said that one day I was going to own this car, and about 10 years ago I had the opportunity to buy it, and I did. This car has a built 350 with a Muncie 4-speed. It's actually a pretty radical motor for the street, but it causes a little excitement when I pull it out of the garage. And the paint on this car is actually still straight lacquer. I've done some repaint and touch up on this car over the years. The color is Millie Miglia red. And the underneath of the car looks just as good as the outside. About 5 years ago I had redone the upholstering on this car. It was starting to fade and wear. And that was actually my first upholstering job I had ever done. And I think it turned out pretty well. This car actually belongs to my father. It's a 1969 Z28. This is an original 29,000 mile four-wheel disc brake Z28 car, which they only built 202. And in 1970, my father and a good friend of his had built this car to drag race, and his friend had campaigned this car for NHRA in the mid-1970s. And he had the opportunity to purchase it about a year ago, and more for sentimental reason than any, we purchased the car. And we still do drag race it regularly. All right, the next car, this car has some family history to it. This is a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air two-door sedan. This car was originally purchased by my uncle, I think in around 1970, and he was in the Vietnam War, and when he was released, his base was in Oklahoma, and he bought the car there, actually on off of an Indian on the Indian reservation. And they built a drag car out of it, and they raced it in the early 70s. And my uncle had stored the car in my grandfather's barn from about the mid-1970s until 1995 when I'd purchased the car. And I had to do some work to it to get it running and on the road, but this is the way that it was built in the early 1970s, and I have really done nothing else to it. It's got a 1969 327 engine with a Muncie Rock Crusher 4-speed, and it has a 1956 Oldsmobile rear end with 513 gears. So with a little bit of work, it could easily put back on the drag strip. Most of the signs on the wall are actually original signs. Some of them came out of a local gas station that had actually never been put on the wall. The Firestone sign, for example, is supposedly from the 1950s, and it was actually in a gas station where there was a flood, and it was standing on end, and I could see the flood line on the sign. That's how long it had been like that. This was actually my first car. It's a go-kart, and we had built it into a miniature funny car. And it's just a 5-horsepower engine, and I used to take it in parades, my brother and I, when we were young, and we've had a lot of fun with this through the years. And after I started to collect some of the automobilia, I kind of got interested in some of the restaurant items, and I found a restaurant booth and a table, and I've collected most of the things that I have are aftermarket items, but I do have some original items. And I collect a lot of Coca-Cola and Pepsi products, and now the Big Boy products, since Big Boy has gone out of business. And I have project cars all over the place. I have a 1937 Plymouth Coupe that I've started on. I'm going to street rod that car, put a modern suspension, modern drive line in it. This car is 1966 Chevrolet Nova Pro Street. I've actually been working on this car since I was 13 years old. Hopefully one of these days it'll get finished. This is the area where I do my painting. This is my current project that I'm working on. This is the 1967 Camaro Rally Sport. This is an original 49,000 mile car undergoing restoration. This is one of my own cars. And I've got bits and pieces of a 1947 Farmall that I'm working on currently. Cars are actually probably my first true love. My first word was actually car. So yeah, this is where I like to spend most of my time. As I mentioned, my hobby's probably gotten a little out of hand. Last year I had to put up a building just for my project cars. And I've got 8 cars in this building awaiting restoration. I've got a 1969 Camaro, a 1977 Monte Carlo, a 1970 Trans Am, a 1963 Nova, a 1970 Nova, a 1966 Nova, and a 1968 Pontiac GTO. Well, I hope you've enjoyed a glimpse at my collection, and I hope to see you at the next car show.